Welcome back to part 2 of our podcast mini-series about the industrial workers of the world Starbucks Workers Union, formed in the early 2000s. If you haven't listened to part 1 yet, I'd go back and listen to that first.
Alla mattina, appena alzata, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao alla mattina.
Before we get started, we just wanted to remind you that our podcast is brought to you by our Patreon supporters. Our supporters fund our work and in return get exclusive early access to podcast episodes without ads, bonus episodes every month, 2 exclusive podcast series, fireside chats and radical reads, as well as free and discounted merch and other content. So our supporters can also listen to part 3 of this mini-series today, as well as an exclusive bonus episode with more information and context. So if you can, please join us and help us preserve and promote our history of collective struggle. Sign up and listen today at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes. With efforts to get official union recognition for the Starbucks Workers Union at the National Labour Relations Board, NLRB, dead in the water, the IWW resorted entirely to solidarity unionism, organising on the shop floor and trying to grow the union.
So we're done with the election stuff and we're just pressing directly for our demands and at the same time working to build out in New York.
This is Daniel Gross, who we spoke to in part 1, who began working at Starbucks in New York and started organising there in 2003.
You know, working with union builders today, we grapple with the question of like, hey, what channels are we going to be able to use to reach our coworkers, right? It's a key question in union building and experimenting with what works. That's exactly what we did at the IWW Starbucks Workers Union. We didn't necessarily have a framework of experimenting explicitly. That's something that was kind of developed by Solidarity Unionists later, but it's absolutely we did. So, you know, we tried like all the things, you know. One thing we tried, which I share as a cautionary tale, because it was not the best channel, was like just literally showing up to, you know, other Starbucks stores. I laugh because this is not something I would do today, just with like a bunch of flyers, right? And like try to have quick convos with workers on shift and, you know, give them a flyer. There's all kinds of things wrong with this, but you know what was absurd comic, it was Starbucks with all their surveillance, you know, had our number on that. And it got to the point where like managers would set up like a desk in stores that were kind of right there, like in the middle of the cafe, waiting for us to come. So you know, we tried that. We tried all the things. I'll tell you what ended up being the most effective is, yeah, I don't know how it is today, but back then, assuming it would be similar, you could pick up shifts at other stores. That ended up being a really, really great way to connect because then you're, you know, you have time, right? You're working together. You could talk about all the things, right, in life and the job and make connections there. So that ended up being a really effective channel.
This is also the case in lots of other organising campaigns, and it can often benefit workers if you can use the employer's own processes, infrastructure, and the ways that workers have to come together and collaborate to do the job to make profits, to organise and forward your own interests as well. In addition to face-to-face organising, the union also tried reaching out through its own media, the corporate media, and through the social movements of that era, namely the anti-capitalist or anti-globalisation movement, as well as the movements against wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, all of which the IWW and its members were embedded in.
Also in the campaign, we generated a lot of media right from the beginning. I think the story broke in the New York Daily News. And it was funny, someone was asking me, oh, you know, they marginalized the Starbucks Workers Union, you know, there's no reporting on it. I said, no, that you can't hang that hat on the corporate media. Actually, there was very copious coverage. You know, New York Times, Good Morning America, NPR, Wall Street Journal, Washington Post, the local TV. You know, now you can say sometimes they bought the company line, and that was frustrating. But there was a lot of media generated, and This was before social media, but we did have a website, so folks could, you know, see something on the local news or read something in the paper and then find our website and contact us through that. So there was a web, I guess that was what, 1.0 or something, way of getting in touch. So some folks got in touch that way. And then the other thing that happened as well is, there is a movement, um, precarity, global justice, anti-war. And in that milieu, there was publications like Indie Media. Some listeners of a certain age may have heard of.
In the 2000s, indie media was a huge phenomenon within social movements. At the time, its approach was pretty revolutionary. Its slogan was, "Don't hate the media, be the media." And it called on participants in social movements, fed up with misrepresentation by the mainstream media, to report on our movements ourselves through what became a global network of open publishing news websites. There were other radical worker-run media projects as well.
There was retailworker.com, and we would put out stuff through there, and that would inspire like some movement folks. So some movement folks also just took it upon themselves to get hired as well at Starbucks. So those were, I think, sort of the channels that kind of started working in New York, basically. Yeah, and again, it started in that one store, but then we started to build out in New York. And over the next couple years, I forget exactly the timeline, we first started growing in New York, starting to meet, as now we're meeting as New York City baristas. And, we're not just meeting as, my shop on Madison Avenue, and building out training and demands and actions, across the stores. Started to get some early victories. And yeah, I believe it was 2006 that I know Chicago was the first city outside of New York where workers went public. Chicago went. And then after that, it was wildfire. Maryland, Omaha, this is not in kind of order, but just these eventually all came online. Twin Cities was very, very strong. Grand Rapids, New Jersey, all around, then into Canada. So yeah, that was kind of the flow of it. The early victories, early organizing, pushing within movement media and corporate media, and then being able to get in touch with folks there. And
Other places workers organised included Fort Worth, Texas, Kansas City, Missouri, the Bay Area in California, Quebec City in Canada, and elsewhere. In addition, more unions and groups of workers also got involved with the organising effort.
many, many groups supported the campaign. A Canadian Union of Postal Employees, Wisconsin grad workers, the CIW farm workers in Florida, anarcho-syndicalist unions in Latin America, Europe. But it's really fair to say it was IWW folks that was definitely the vast majority of support. So, very motivated Wobblies, were on hand to help out and spread the word in their city. So that was sort of a growth channel as well. IWW branches and their very active members. So yeah, that was the sort of growth pattern of how it went from that one store I was at, into a national, and then through coalitions, it ultimately international work.
In the typical style of the industrial workers of the world, IWW, or Wobblies, its members would focus on trying to win improvements by taking direct action on the job.
I mean, we were very action oriented. So a lot of short work stoppages to do delegations to management. Some stores kind of quickie strikes, if you will, to try to hit demand or kind of draw down the ability for the company to sell in a given day. Tons of pickets, marches. One nice little one we like to do would be to ask allies come and order stuff and tip well, but then pay in pennies and belabor each penny as you count it out on the counter.
Often, the union would target Howard Schultz, the boss, himself.
We did home demonstrations at the CEO's house or chairman. Sometimes he was chairman, sometimes he was CEO, sometimes he's both. We bird dogged them too. That's activist jargon for going where the target is, wherever the target is. So we would hit up Howard Schultz at his appearances, and he'd inevitably behave very cowardly and try to escape the scene. Shareholder meetings, so much shop floor stuff. These maybe are not the flashiest things, but really a culture of solidarity, like standing up for each other. Hey, they haven't trained us in that particular chemical solvent. We're not supposed to be on our knees, scrubbing that drain in that way without the right gloves. Like, I got your back if you want to refuse this, things like that.
Many of these on the job actions were around individual cases, while employers' procedures and often union contracts try to individualize problems and channel them into official channels where workers are atomized, like disciplinary or grievance procedures. The IWW or solidarity unionism approach is to try to collectivize and organize around these issues, especially because these so-called individual problems are rarely actually individual, and often they're the result of systemic issues. I talk about some of my experiences organising like this at my work in our Fireside Chat podcast, episode 105, available exclusively for our supporters on Patreon.
Doing direct action grievance handling was, really, really key part of our work. If you look at the direct action kind of individual grievances we fought through in the IWW Starbucks Workers Union, a huge number were women of color, single moms often, who were messed around with on their shift, who were disrespected, who were denied opportunities, who were wrongfully disciplined. It's like a huge, huge percentage number. Yeah, we're our coworkers of color, a lot of women, folk of color in particular. So that was definitely a thread in the work experience that was part of what was animating our struggle. There's a more of a older worker, Sherry Brown, who had been part of the Black Panthers free breakfast program in Baltimore. He was later a barista in DC, and irate customer threatened his life, right? And he basically very calmly attempted to de-escalate the situation and, stood up for his life. And, they put him under investigation and ultimately they fired him. It was really rough because he was then kind of put into a eviction situation. His neighborhood was gentrifying rapidly in DC. So that's the example. We hit the company, right? We hit them with pickets in Washington D.C. We hit them with pickets more broadly. We probably did legal stuff. I don't exactly recall in Sherry Brown's case, media stuff. That's one example of, just hundreds, so many struggles like that. Many, many, many cases of racial aggression, cases of discrimination against women, workers. Yeah, another one that comes to mind was a coworker in New York. He was denied, I think, the shifts that he needed or some type of advancement, maybe to a different role. Forget, but the company had told him he was too ghetto. Now, of course, you might imagine that he didn't take too kindly to that. And yeah, we would have it out with the company. We would do delegations, we would do pickets, we would do media, we would do legal, and we resolved hundreds of discrimination issues, retaliation issues. We would do something where this happened, I think, in response to some anti-union discrimination against Sarah Bender. That was a very active IWW Starbucks Workers Union organizer at her store and nationally. We did a thing, and I think we did it elsewhere, but I believe the first was with her case, where we developed this. I think it was Union Buster of the Month award, something like that. And we'd make a certificate. I think we framed it. And You go, you get a huge community delegation, always led by baristas, and you choreograph what we wanted to say, and just hit the store, go right up to the district manager or manager, deliver the deliver the gift, and just keep pressing. There's just so many.
Another case the union took up was around workers' religious freedom.
One was the involved Suli Ayala, as a very active IWW Starbucks Workers Union barista, indigenous Ecuadorian coworker from the Bronx, and Suli was a practicing Wiccan, and she would wear a pentagram necklace during her shift, and the company just went on this huge warpath, writing Suli up, threatening Suli with termination, harassing her all around this pentacle. So the SWU's direct action grievance community, we all picked this up together as baristas and started pushing the company on that, doing actions. I think we filed a EEOC discrimination case, doing media, internet stuff. It's all coming together. But the straw that kind of broke the camel's back was the union baristas at Suli's store had a plan. And I think it was, if the company was gonna, I think they were kicking Suli off the shifts for wearing the necklace. The idea was, next time it happened, another union barista would put on the necklace, and then so on from there. So like clockwork, they kicked Suli out of the shift, and I think it was the very first barista who then took the necklace, started working with the necklace on, and such a classic wobbly story, right? And then was kicked out, but if memory serves, that was it. Like, the company's will was broken. I'm sure the legal played the part, the media played the part, the internet played the part, but the final, like, checkmate to get Suli back, fully reinstated and with the right to express, her religious faith in that way, was that little direct action. So I remember that was definitely, that was a beautiful action.
This very much echoes actions of the historical IWW, which we talk about in our episode 6, particularly its free speech fights. When IWW organisers were arrested for public speaking, the union would start a campaign for free speech and would call in wobblies from around the country to flood whatever town they were in and begin speaking as soon as the previous speaker was arrested, flooding the jails and courthouses until eventually the authorities would have to cave in and grant the union the right to speak and organise publicly. Another incident Daniel told me about I already knew about because I remembered reading about it in the IWW newspaper. It took place at the Logan Square Starbucks in Chicago in 2006.
The baristas at this particular store, they had to reach up for supplies in a high cabinet, and they're positioning themselves on a counter. They're constantly risking their health, and they're just very, very fed up not having a simple step ladder to reach these supplies in a high up cabinet. Of course, for years, before they went union, they're asking for the step ladder. Company won't do it because that would mean spending money. That would mean caring about whether a barista gets hurt or not. So as union members, they, choreographed the plan to try to accomplish this task of getting a stepladder. So what they did was they actually purchased a stepladder, and they brought it to work, right? And they started using it. Now, the kind of the beautiful thing was they had a IWW sticker on it, which they made, which said, "For a safer, healthier workplace." And so they really put management in a pickle, right? What are you gonna do? Are you gonna let, like, this useful tool from the IWW, right, that workers wanted to avoid unsafe climbing on tables? Like, are you gonna just let that be there, right? Or do you just take it away? Now you just even more so have shown your reckless disregard for workers' health and safety. So they're in a bit of a pickle there, management. They're scrambling around right away. So of course, what did the company do? They went out and bought the ladder, right? Within hours. and they brought it in, and now the workers won the ladder. And of course, the initial plan was, hey, let's go return the ladder that we had bought. But yeah, I think it became kind of a historical relic. The Chicago IWW baristas held on to it. And we ran that playbook at least at one other store. I think it was for a fan. It may have been others, but I'm remembering at least one more play of that exact playbook to get a fan. But it's just a wonderful genre of direct action of, kind of just do the thing you need, right? Directly, and put pressure on the opponent that way. So yeah, that was a really nice, memorable, creative action that we were able to prevail on.
This story also stuck with me when I read it nearly 20 years ago because it's an example of an action which is both so simple, so effective, and it really just shows up how ridiculously petty management can be. And that sort of thing can be a great tool for growing the union further and showing your fellow workers just how little management cares for their supposed partners. We'll be right back after these messages. If you want to listen to our podcast without ads, join us on Patreon, where you can also listen to an exclusive bonus episode as part of this mini-series. Support from our listeners on Patreon is the only way that we can devote the time and money it takes to make this podcast. So do learn more and join us at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes. Facing rapid growth of the union in New York, Starbucks management tried to head it off to an extent by attempting to address some of the root causes of worker unrest, principally low pay. So first, they increased hourly pay by $1 across the board. Then they increased it again. By 2006, New York baristas were making $9.63 an hour after 6 months of employment. That's an increase of nearly 25% in 2.5 years. And eventually they increased pay for workers in other states as well. The company claimed that this was not related to the union activity, but as The Nation magazine argued, that claim was simply not credible. Wages in the US over that time period generally only increased around 10%, so such an unusually large increase was clearly a response to the union organizing.
As we discussed earlier, from that initial work, the campaign ended up spreading like wildfire. Folks stepped up and we're doing IWW Starbucks Workers Unionism, different parts of the country and into Canada. And so we would have the issues we would fight on locally, regionally, in our districts, and then the kind of overall demands. And we would fight locally, regionally, and nationally, all pushed for those national demands. Definitely the wage increase piece was key. We won across the board wage increases, starting in New York, but then ultimately nationally. The IWW Starbucks Workers Union achieved literally hundreds of millions of dollars worth of wage victories into our pockets as baristas when we would crunch the number and do the math.
A major benefit with pay increases is that they are long-term because future pay increases are based on historic rates. So even the pay Starbucks workers get today is still significantly higher than it would otherwise have been without this organising in the 2000s. In stores where the union was active, workers were also able to get better local arrangements on staffing levels and working hours.
We, for that decade and a half, were able to, in many cases, have much more secure hours than we had, better staffing than we'd had.
For Daniel, one of the most poignant victories of the union was their campaign to put Martin Luther King Jr.'s federal holiday on a par with other federal holidays.
So Starbucks made a big show of so-called, what it would say, embracing diversity. We talked about previously how it's a lie, but the Dr. King kind of second-class holiday status was really a stark illustration belying Starbucks' commitment. The other federal holidays, Starbucks would pay a time and a half holiday premium and kind of officially recognize it. Dr. King's Day, no. So we set out to do this fight to win the time and a half, to get the recognition for one of labor's great martyrs.
While Dr. King is best known as a civil rights martyr, he was assassinated while he was supporting a strike by sanitation workers, which we discuss more in our episodes 99 to 100.
We fought it out. We fought it out in stores. when the company would do different kind of marketing oriented events in cities, we would go bust those up. When senior executives would come into town, independent media, corporate media, internet, all the things, coalition building, just ground it out year after year. 3 years, we fought it out, and ultimately we prevailed. Obviously, it's significant, over 100,000 workers. So, time and a half. That's real resources going from the company's coffers that we earned into our pockets. But beyond the important material benefit, which is obvious, being able to say we were able to contribute this for, again, one of labor's great martyrs. So that was a victory to be really proud of. We struggled a lot, and this piece had a major legal component.
In addition to direct action and public campaigning, the IWW also took legal action against Starbucks and their frequent violations of labour law.
Many large trials against Starbucks, hundreds of thousands of corporate documents we got a hold of. And, through that, we were able to win respect nationally for the right to wear IWW union pins, use bulletin boards for union communications, discuss wages and working conditions. We beat them and overturned some of the firings that they had accomplished.
For example, in 2006, after a complaint from the union to the National Labour Relations Board, NLRB, Starbucks had to rehire 2 workers in New York who'd been fired for union activity. And 2 years later, Starbucks was forced to rehire Eric Foreman, another IWW barista working at Starbucks in the Mall of America in Minnesota. In addition, the union took on the company for their unhealthy products and on safety violations, which put customers as well as staff at risk.
We walloped them on the poor nutrition of their products, sickening local communities and baristas with all the sugar and the saturated fat that they weren't disclosing at the time. We fought them on that. They were hit very hard. Yeah, we were heavy hitters and landed very, very strong blows to achieve that. That was a national piece.
While Starbucks did end up taking action following union campaigns, they would never admit that they were a response to union action.
Starbucks never acknowledged any union victory whatsoever. I mean, we could slam them on the rats and insects like we did in New York because we were sick of working with rats and insects. We did a big campaign because they wouldn't do anything about it. We took photos and videos of them, and we did a press conference with Inflatable Rat, went kind of viral in New York local media. Within hours, the management was literally on their hands and knees scrubbing. They had called, contractors in to do the work, to make the structural repairs that were needed, and exterminators, all the things. They still denied that, it was our victory, right? But the cool thing is, as baristas, you see through that, right? Same with Dr. King's Day. We fight them relentlessly for 3 years. They have to deny constantly in the press, justify why they're not paying Dr. King's Day. Finally, they cave in. So yeah, we just felt like doing it this year, right? So yeah, it's a very, very good point. In solidarity unionism, it's just really key to be aware that the company is not going to acknowledge your victories.
It's therefore incumbent on workers and the union itself to relentlessly try to publicise your achievements to your colleagues. I know this is something that I put a lot of effort into with my personal organising, making sure that our union kept a full list of all the gains we won and consistently promoted this to our co-workers. Otherwise, management will happily take credit and chalk up any improvements to their own benevolence.
Portami via, oh bella ciao, bella ciao, bella ciao, ciao, ciao. Partigiano, portami via, che mi sento di morire.
That's all we've got time for this week. Learn more in part 3, and you can listen to that now by joining us on Patreon, which is how our work is funded. There you can also access loads of other great exclusive content, including a bonus episode with more information from Daniel about his work and activism. It's only support from you, our listeners, which makes these podcasts possible. So if you appreciate our work, please do think about joining us at patreon.com/workingclasshistory. Link in the show notes. Otherwise, part 3 will be out for everyone else in the next couple of weeks. If joining us on Patreon isn't an option for you at the moment, please don't worry about it, but do tell your friends about this podcast and give us a 5-star review on your favourite podcast app. We've got books by Daniel and others available in our online store, including an account of organising at Starbucks and a really useful book called Labour Law for the Rank and Filer, along with other organising guides. Check them out on the link in the show notes. And as a listener of this podcast, you can get 10% off them or anything else in your first order using the discount code WCH Podcast. Daniel also has a new book out with Haymarket called Unions of Our Own, and he's currently organising with the Solidarity Union Network. Links in the show notes. Learn more about the IWW in the rest of our podcast series about the Union, so check out episodes 6, 9, 16, 19, 52, 73, 74, and episode 1 of the Working Class Literature podcast. As always, we've got more information, sources, and eventually a transcript on the webpage for this episode. Link in the show notes. Thanks to our Patreon supporters for making this podcast possible. Special thanks to Jazz Hands. Our theme tune is Bella Ciao. Thanks for permission to use it from Dischi del Sole. You can buy it or stream it on the links in the show notes. This episode was edited by Jesse French. Thanks for listening, and catch you next time.